Have you ever felt your entire world collapse in the space of a single sentence? That's what happened to me at my own dinner table, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. The air seemed to freeze as my mother-in-law Patricia's voice cut through the Thanksgiving chatter. "Tyler doesn't look much like you, does he, James?" she said, swirling her wine glass and glancing at my 7-year-old son. My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. I'd heard it for 8 years, sweet poison wrapped in casual observation. But it was James's response that shattered everything. My husband, my partner of 8 years, leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his whiskey, and said, "You don't even know who the real father is." At first, I thought I misheard him. I forced a laugh, waiting for him to say it was a joke. But then I looked across the table at Patricia and saw her smile. Not a kind smile, the kind of smile that appears when someone finally says what you've been thinking all along. She chuckled. "That boy doesn't even look like you, Micah," she repeated, and just like that, the table erupted in laughter. James's brother Mark joined in, though his girlfriend looked uncomfortable. My sister Amber sat frozen, eyes wide. It all happened so fast. The sound of their laughter hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. I could see in their eyes that they believed it. James didn't defend me, didn't laugh and say, "Y'all are ridiculous." He just took another drink and smirked. I remember feeling my stomach twist. My throat tightened, and my hands were suddenly ice cold. I looked to my son, Tyler, who was sitting right beside me. He had stopped eating. His fork was down. His face was still. He heard it, every word. While they were laughing, something in me was breaking. I had spent years proving myself to James's family. Patricia had never liked me, never hid it either. She said I acted too perfect, like I was pretending to be better than everyone. The truth is, I was just trying to survive. I didn't know what was about to happen next would change everything. Rewind 12 hours. I woke up at 5 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. The house was silent as I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake James. I kissed Tyler's forehead as he slept, his Batman pajamas twisted around him, before tiptoeing downstairs. This was our first Thanksgiving hosting in the 3-bedroom suburban house James and I had saved for 3 years to buy. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the cinnamon candles in the entryway to the handwritten place cards with gold foil letters. I prepped the turkey, baked sweet potato pies from scratch, and even whipped cream by hand. By noon, I was sweating but smiling, pretending I wasn't exhausted. I kept checking the mirror, fixing my curls, reapplying lip gloss, smoothing invisible wrinkles in my dress. This house was supposed to be our fresh start. I remember walking through it during the open house last spring, barefoot on the hardwood floors, imagining Tyler running down the hallway with his toy sword, yelling, "Dragon attack." It was the kind of home that made you believe things were finally coming together. But the truth was, things had been falling apart for a long time. James had become distant over the years. Cold. Always working late. Always on his phone. The warmth that had drawn me to him had dimmed to barely a flicker. I'd met him when I was 24, working 2 jobs trying to get through nursing school. James came in like a rescue boat, charming, confident, financially stable. My dad, Robert, didn't trust him from the start. But I wanted so badly to believe I'd finally found someone who chose me. So I poured my whole heart into this dinner. I wanted James's family to see that I belonged, that I was worthy of being part of their family, that I wasn't just some girl James had settled for. As I arranged the centerpiece, fall leaves, and candles, I'd spent an hour perfecting. I heard Tyler's footsteps racing down the stairs. He burst into the kitchen wearing the blue plaid shirt he'd picked out himself. "Mom, do I look like a gentleman?" he asked, giving me a twirl. I smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "The most handsome gentleman I've ever seen," I told him, and he beamed. Tyler was everything good in my life: thoughtful, sensitive, bright. He didn't deserve the coldness that had seeped into our home. "When's Grandpa coming?" he asked, climbing onto a stool to watch me cook. Robert. My rock. The man who had stepped in when James stepped back. "He'll be here at 3, buddy," I said. "With Aunt Amber." Tyler pumped his fist. "Yes, I made him a special turkey card. And I practiced that joke he taught me." I ruffled his hair, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach that tightened every time I thought about everyone in the same room. If I could just make it through this dinner, maybe things would get better. Maybe James would remember why we became a family in the first place. ## Chapter 3 Moi Quan He Jia Din. Patricia was the first to arrive, 15 minutes early and wearing that thick perfume that always made me sneeze. She kissed Tyler's cheek and barely looked at me. "Oh, you went with a store-bought centerpiece," she said, eyeing my handcrafted arrangement. "I made it myself," I replied, teeth clenched in a smile. "Took about an hour." She just hummed and moved on, setting down a foil-covered dish. I brought my cornbread, James's favorite. James came downstairs late, fixing his cufflinks, scrolling through his phone. He hugged his mother and nodded at me like I was a caterer he'd hired. Tyler ran to show him the table he'd helped set, but James just patted his head absently. "Looking good, bud," he said, eyes still on his screen. Mark arrived next with his girlfriend, followed by Patricia's sister Vera, who always wore too much jewelry and never forgot to bring gossip. Amber, my younger sister, came last with my dad, Robert the only faces that made me exhale. Tyler practically launched himself into Robert's arms. "Grandpa," he shouted. Robert scooped him up, laughing. "There's my boy." "Man, you're getting heavy. What's your mom feeding you, Rox?" Tyler giggled. "No, just vegetables. Lots and lots of vegetables." Robert had been everything to Tyler since day one. He was the one showing up, reading bedtime stories, teaching him how to tie his shoes, coming to every school event when James was working. Tyler adored him, called him my main guy. Robert gave me a long hug when he set Tyler down. "Proud of you, baby girl," he said quietly. I held on to that moment like oxygen. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table and tried to feel what I was supposed to feel. Thankful, blessed, loved. But underneath the clinks of silverware and forced laughter, I could feel the cracks. James barely made eye contact with me. He joked with his brother, talked business with his mom, scrolled through his phone. He didn't notice the food, didn't compliment the effort. He didn't see me. Patricia kept making little remarks. "Oh, you didn't brine the turkey?" "My mama always said that's the secret." I smiled. I always smiled. That was my role, pleasant, put together, unbothered. But inside, I was wilting. And the worst part was knowing that even my silence would be used against me. If I spoke up, I was too sensitive. If I didn't, I was fake. Tyler was the only bright spot. He beamed every time someone laughed at his stories. He had drawn pictures for everyone, folding them into little envelopes with glitter stickers. He gave one to Patricia that said, "Happy Turkey Day," with a stick figure family holding hands. She barely looked at it. That hurt him more than he showed. I could tell. Conversation flowed like cold molasses. Patricia dominated, talking about her church friends and their successful children. Mark kept the peace, asking questions and nodding. Amber tried to help me, complimenting the food, asking James about their new project at work. "It's going well," he said vaguely, then turned to Robert. "How's retirement treating you, old man?" Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can't complain. Keeping busy with this little man." He nudged Tyler, who was quietly pushing sweet potatoes around his plate. "We're building a birdhouse, aren't we, bud?" Tyler perked up. "Yeah, Grandpa's teaching me to use a real hammer and everything." James's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "You shouldn't be bothering your grandpa with that stuff, Tyler. He's got his own things to do." "He's never a bother," Robert said firmly, placing his hand on Tyler's shoulder. Highlight of my week. The tension hummed like a live wire. I jumped in, offering more mashed potatoes, asking Vera about her new condo, anything to shift the atmosphere. But it was like trying to redirect a river with my bare hands. As I served dessert, my homemade pecan pie with the whipped cream Tyler had helped make, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were almost through. Just coffee, then goodbyes, then I could exhale. Tyler was telling Vera about how he helped make the whipped cream, his hands moving excitedly as he explained. "First you pour in the heavy stuff." "Heavy cream," I corrected gently. "Yeah, heavy cream. And then you whip it super duper fast until it gets all fluffy." Vera laughed, genuinely charmed. "Well, you did a wonderful job." "It's delicious." Tyler beamed, and I felt a moment of pure gratitude. But then Patricia reached for her wine glass, and the air in the room shifted. Like the stillness before a storm. "James," she said, swirling her red wine, "you sure that boy's yours? He's got more of her daddy's face than yours." The room didn't instantly go silent like in movies. Instead, there was this awful half-second where some conversations continued before trailing off awkwardly. Then that terrible silence closed in. James didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, smirking like this was just another episode of family banter, and said, "You don't even know who the real father is." The words hung in the air like poison. "This is where our story began." I froze. The words didn't feel real at first. It was like someone else in the room had said them, someone cruel, someone who didn't know me. But it was him, my husband, the man I'd built a life with. My first instinct was to laugh, to deflect, to make it seem like he was joking. Because the alternative that he meant it was too humiliating to comprehend. I looked at him, hoping to see a wink, a sign that this was all in bad taste. But there was no sign, just silence and then laughter. Patricia burst into a wheezing chuckle, covering her mouth like she'd been waiting for that moment her entire life. "Oh Lord," she said. I always knew something was off. Mark laughed too, shaking his head. Even Vera had this half-smile like she was trying not to get involved but couldn't help herself. Amber looked at me, eyes wide with panic, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Robert was dead silent, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. And my son, my sweet, sensitive, big-hearted Tyler. He was right there, sitting next to me, eyes locked on his father. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't confused. He was listening. I felt my body go cold. The pie in my mouth turned to ash. I was suddenly hyper-aware of everything, the sound of James's spoon clinking against his plate, the way Patricia swirled her wine, the scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air like it was mocking me for trying too hard. James didn't say anything else. He didn't explain. Didn't apologize. Just leaned back and took another sip of his drink like what he said was the most casual thing in the world. I wanted to scream. Not because I had anything to hide, but because he let them believe it. Let them think I had betrayed him. That I was the liar. That our son was some kind of mistake. And the worst part, he said it in front of Tyler. My son. The child I carried, loved, protected. The child who asked me every day if I was proud of him. James had taken something sacred and thrown it across the table like a cheap punchline. I turned to Tyler, and his face broke my heart. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He looked ashamed, like he was the one being questioned, like he had done something wrong. In that moment, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab his hand, walk out of that house, and never look back. But then Tyler pushed his chair back. He stood up straight, calm, quiet. Everyone stopped, even Patricia. He looked around the room, eyes wide but steady, and said, "Actually, I know who he is." My breath caught. I reached for him, not to stop him, but to protect him. But he moved just out of reach. James raised an eyebrow. "Tyler, sit down," he said sharply. But my son didn't move, didn't blink. And in that second, I realized something. This wasn't my moment to control. This was his. Tyler stood in the middle of that dining room like it wasn't full of adults who had just laughed at his existence. He didn't fidget, didn't look down, just stood there in his little plaid shirt, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to calm a storm inside himself. Everyone was silent. Even the clinking of plates had stopped. James was the first to break it. "Tyler," he said, voice sharp. I said, "Sit down." But Tyler didn't budge. His hands were balled into little fists at his sides, and his tiny jaw, was clenched the same way Robert's gets when someone disrespects him. I said, James repeated, slower this time, "Sit down." And that's when I saw it. Something changed in my son's face. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was resolve. He looked James in the eyes and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You don't get to talk to me like that. You're not even really my dad." A gasp. I heard it leave Patricia's mouth before she could stop it. Amber's fork dropped onto her plate. Vera muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. I stood up, unsure whether to protect him or let him finish. My legs felt weak, like my body didn't know how to move through this moment. But I stayed still. My heart told me, let him speak. James barked a laugh like Tyler had told a bad joke. "What are you talking about? Don't be ridiculous." Tyler turned to the table, his voice trembling now, but still strong. "I heard you that night in the kitchen. You told someone on the phone you only stayed with us to keep your image. You said you never really felt like my dad anyway." Now it was James who was frozen. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Tyler looked around the table at his uncle, his grandma, his aunt, all the people who had just laughed like his whole identity was a joke. "I know who my real dad is," he said. Then he looked at Robert, my father. "He's sitting right there." Robert's eyes welled up instantly. He didn't move, just stared at Tyler like he was seeing him for the first time and remembering every single moment they'd shared. "This man," Tyler said, pointing to his grandfather, "taught me how to ride a bike. He came to my school when I was scared to perform. He tells me stories every night when I sleep at his house. He always says I'm brave, even when I'm not." Patricia tried to cut in. "Sweetheart, your daddy." "No," Tyler said with a firmness I'd never heard from a child. "James is my mom's husband, but he's not my dad. Not really." The silence after that was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. James stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Elena, you're just going to let him disrespect me like that?" I turned to him, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what I had to say. "I'm not letting him do anything," I said. "He's speaking the truth, and I won't silence him just because it makes you uncomfortable." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked around for support, but no one met his gaze. Not even Patricia. Tyler slowly walked back to his seat and sat down, but he didn't lower his head. He didn't shrink. He sat like a boy who had earned the right to take up space. And me? I had never felt more proud. He had taken the thing they tried to use against him, doubt, shame, questions, and turned it into power. He spoke with more courage in 5 minutes than I had in 5 years. That moment changed everything. Not just in how they saw him, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was raising a lion. The silence after Tyler sat down wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind that comes after an earthquake when everyone's trying to figure out if the ground beneath them is still real. Nobody touched their plates. Nobody blinked. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. That's how quiet it got. James stood stiff at the end of the table, arms crossed, face tight like a balloon about to pop. I could see the fury building in his eyes, but he didn't yell. Not yet. Because somewhere deep down, even he knew the boy had just told the truth. Don't flatter yourself, James finally muttered toward my father. You're not his dad just because you babysit a few times. Robert didn't respond. He didn't need to. He was too focused on Tyler. He leaned in just slightly and gave him the softest nod. One of those quiet, I see you kind of nods. Tyler looked back at him and smiled just barely. That little exchange that was real. James tried to keep talking, tried to shift the blame. I said what I said because I was angry, he said, waving one hand dismissively. You know how people get when they drink. It was a stupid joke, okay? I stood up. I had been sitting this entire time, still silent, trying not to lose my composure. But when he called it a joke again, something inside me snapped clean in two. You humiliated me in front of your entire family, I said. My voice was low, calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. You tried to shame me in front of our child, and now you're calling it a joke. James looked at me like he didn't recognize me. I walked around the table, past the dishes, the spilled gravy, the wine stains on the white tablecloth. I stopped beside Tyler and placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me, and I nodded. I'm not ashamed of anything, I said. Not of this boy, not of the man who raised him when you didn't, and not of myself. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly struggling to regain control of the narrative. Well, Elena, I'm sure none of this was your intention, but you can see how this situation looks from our side. I turned to her and said, plain and clear, you don't get to have a side in this. That shut her up. James clenched his fists, still trying to hold his ground. You're blowing everything out of proportion, he said. We can talk about this later, privately. No, I said. We're done talking. I'm done covering for you. You want to tell lies in front of your family? Then you can hear the truth in front of them, too. I looked around the table at all the faces that had looked at me with doubt for years. James hasn't been around, I said. He hasn't been present. Not as a husband, not as a father. He shows up for the pictures, for the holidays, when it looks good. But he doesn't show up when it matters. James's mouth twisted, but he didn't deny it. Couldn't. Everything Tyler knows about strength, love, honesty, he didn't learn that from James, I continued. He learned it from my dad, from me, from people who actually love him. Robert still hadn't spoken a word, but his eyes were full. Not just with tears, but with pride. James finally pushed his chair back and walked away from the table, muttering something under his breath. I didn't follow him. No one did. Tyler looked up at me again, and this time I crouched down beside him. You okay? I asked. He nodded. I just wanted them to know the truth. I smiled. You did good, baby. You told your truth. That's the bravest thing a person can do. And in that moment, surrounded by the mess, the tension, the broken image of what I thought our family was supposed to be, I realized something. We weren't broken. We were finally free. The day after Thanksgiving, the table was still set. Crumbs on plates, a half-full glass of wine, and that handmade Happy Turkey Day card Tyler gave Patricia, still sitting there unopened. James didn't sleep at the house that night. He grabbed his keys, slammed the door, and said he needed space. Space, I thought, was the one thing he never struggled to take. I stood in the quiet for a long time after he left. Just me and Tyler. He was in his pajamas, curled on the couch with a blanket and his favorite dinosaur plushie. I watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling slowly, peacefully, as if nothing about that night had broken him. But it had changed him. It had changed us both. Over the next few days, the silence in the house started to feel more like peace than emptiness. No stomping shoes, no passive-aggressive remarks, no pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. It was just me and my son. And for the first time, I realized how much weight I had been carrying to protect someone who never protected me back. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I filed for separation. Not out of anger, not for revenge, but because my son deserved a home where love didn't have to be begged for. Patricia called once, left a voicemail telling me she was deeply disappointed in how things were handled, that I let a child speak out of turn and disrespected her son. I deleted it halfway through. The woman who laughed at my pain didn't get a say in my healing. Amber and my dad checked in constantly. Robert started picking Tyler up every Friday night for guys' night. They'd eat pancakes for dinner, build blanket forts, and fall asleep watching superhero cartoons. And every Sunday morning when he dropped Tyler off, he'd hug me a little tighter, say things like, "You did the right thing," or "I see you, baby." He didn't have to say much. I already knew. I put the house on the market. I couldn't afford it on my nurse's salary alone, and every corner held memories of trying too hard to please people who were determined not to be pleased. The first time I walked through a small 2-bedroom apartment with good schools nearby, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Tyler ran from room to room, already planning where his books would go, which wall would hold his space poster. "Can Grandpa stay over here too?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "Anytime he wants, I promised. We'll get a pull-out couch just for him." That night, as I tucked Tyler in, he asked me a question that broke my heart and healed it all at once. "Mom," he said, voice small in the darkness, "are you mad at me for what I said to James?" I sat on the edge of his bed, running my fingers through his hair. "No, baby. Not at all. I'm proud of you." "Really?" "Really. It takes courage to speak your truth, especially when grown-ups aren't. You stood up for yourself. For us." He was quiet for a moment. "Do I still have to call him Dad?" I took a deep breath. "You can call him whatever feels right to you. It's your choice." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'll just call him James. That's his name." Out of the mouths of babes. Such simple wisdom. Tyler was different after that day. Not in a bad way, just more sure of himself, more curious, more direct. He started asking big questions like, "Do grown-ups always lie when they're scared? And was Grandpa like my dad when you were little too?" I answered him honestly because that's what we do now. We tell the truth even when it's hard. I put myself into therapy and signed Tyler up, too, because sometimes healing takes more than time. It takes help, and there's no shame in that. We both needed a safe place to put our pain and learn how to let go of the parts that never belonged to us. James sent a few texts after the papers were filed. Said he wanted to talk, apologized in that half-hearted way some men do when they're not really sorry, they're just sorry it cost them something. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because here's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt because someone breaks your trust. It hurts because you let them. But here's what they also don't tell you. Healing doesn't require permission. You don't have to wait for an apology to move forward. You don't have to be broken forever just because someone treated you like you were disposable. I'm not disposable. And neither is my son. We moved into the apartment in January. It was smaller than the house, but it felt warmer somehow. We painted Tyler's room together a deep blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I let him pick out all the decorations. It was his space, his sanctuary. Robert helped us move, spending 3 days assembling furniture, hanging curtains, making sure everything was just right. He brought a housewarming gift, a small wooden sign that read, "Home is where your story begins." We hung it right by the front door. Tyler's first parent-teacher conference after the separation, I went alone. Nervous, wondering if the change would show in his grades, his behavior. His teacher, Mrs. Coleman, smiled as soon as I sat down. "Tyler's really blossomed these past few months," she said. "He's participating more, helping other kids. Yesterday, he stood up for a classmate who was being teased. Said everyone deserves respect." I bit my lip, fighting back tears. "He's been through a lot," I said. She nodded. "Whatever you're doing at home, it's working." He's more confident, more himself. More himself. That's exactly what it was. And me? I was finding myself too. Going back to work full time, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with, learning to trust my own voice again. Some days were harder than others. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made the right choice, if I could really do this alone. But then I'd hear Tyler laughing with Robert in the living room, or catch him humming to himself while doing homework, and I'd know we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, our apartment feels like home. I've replaced the framed photos of fake smiles with pictures that mean something. Tyler with syrup on his face at brunch. Robert and Tyler fishing off the dock last summer. Me holding Tyler in the hospital room when he was born, eyes swollen from tears and joy all at once. This is our story now. No more pretending. No more silence. Just truth and love, the kind that shows up, not the kind that just claims the title. Last weekend, Tyler had a baseball game. His first time playing. He wasn't very good, missed the ball more than he hit it. But every time he stepped up to bat, Robert and I cheered so loud the other parents gave us looks. James showed up halfway through, stood awkwardly at the fence. Tyler saw him, gave a small wave, then turned his attention back to the game. No running to him, no desperate need for approval. Just acknowledgement. On his terms. After the game, Tyler ran straight to Robert. "Did you see me hit it, Grandpa?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "Sure did, buddy," Robert said, ruffling his hair. "Knocked it right out of the park." "I didn't hit it that far," Tyler laughed. "Well, you will next time. Just keep practicing." James approached cautiously, hands in his pockets. "Good game, Tyler," he said stiffly. Tyler nodded. "Thanks for coming." Simple. Polite. Honest. As we walked to the car, Tyler reached for both our hands, mine and Robert's. "Can we get ice cream?" he asked. "To celebrate my almost home run?" We laughed. "Absolutely," I said. Watching him in the rearview mirror, ice cream smeared on his chin, laughing at Robert's bad jokes, I felt a fullness in my chest that almost hurt. This boy, this brave, honest, resilient boy, had shown me what family really means. It's not about biology. It's not about legal documents. It's not about keeping up appearances. Family is about showing up. About seeing each other truly and loving what you see. About choosing each other every day. So, if you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel small, like your love didn't count because it didn't come in the right form, let me tell you something. Blood doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Consistency does. Truth does. My son may not have James's nose, but he's got my heart. He's got my strength. And he's got the kind of bravery that some people spend a lifetime chasing. They laughed at that dinner table. Nobody's laughing now. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to fight for your truth or protect someone you love when no one else would, then you already know. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand in your truth. And sometimes the bravest voice in the room belongs to the smallest person.